Okay, I mean, a very, very quick introduction. You're in West Yorkshire. You're you're part of the group setting up the West Yorkshire, well, in fact, a Yorkshire-wide FairCoin node, which will be one of the first regions in the UK to be able to help FairCoin function in the UK. That's a quick summary of why I'm talking to Graham.
Yeah. So
go on.
Yeah. So FairCoin. I mean, I think everyone here sort of. I've been following FairCoin and the FairCoin project and getting involved in it to one level or another for 5 years now, something like that. So it's quite interesting, but it's still very experimental. It's still very early days. So what they're trying to do, as I see it, is really something quite radical in terms of creating an alternative economy. Not engaging with the sort of mainstream fiat currencies and trying to do something that's really quite separate. So it's interesting as an experiment. Whether it's actually going to succeed or not, I really don't know at this stage. But there seems to be, gaining some traction and some interest, and there seems to be, a significant number of people that are putting a lot of time and energy. So on that basis, it's interesting.
The thing that caught my attention about FairCoin and FairCoop, which is the cooperative of users that owns FairCoin and sets the exchange rate and so on, was the democratic nature of running a currency, but also the possibility to support internationally those projects which would perhaps otherwise struggle to survive within capitalism using fiat currencies. Yes, particularly I heard about FairCoin around about the same time that I heard about the VMA occupied factory in Greece, and how worker co-op shops in Germany were thinking of becoming outlets for the products from VMA in Greece. And I was thinking, this is great. This is finally the kind of opportunity where we internationally can support those projects that are, very close to being outside capitalism. They have lots of engagement with their local communities. The democracy of the whole community in what that factory produces is amazing. It's not just the workers even, it's much wider than that. And that we are in a position to support and help that factory is great. And getting olive oil from Spain and paying people directly outside of international monetary systems is really exciting. So that's what really caught my attention, that it's two things. One, solidarity for existing projects now, and two, a step towards working outside capitalism and developing supply chains which could survive a fiat currency crash, which doesn't seem completely impossible to me. And I wondered, is there more to it even for you, or are those the same things?
It's an interesting question. I think that, I think it has great potential. I mean, one of the things that first attracted me to the whole thing was the idea that you could do things outside of those sort of traditional concepts of the nation state, and it moves beyond borders. So you can just do stuff, and it's very cheap to do stuff. So the transaction costs are minimal if you want to play in that space. I guess so. There is enormous potential to do something there, but it involves, in order for it to work, it's the same with any sort of new currency or alternative currency. Is you've got to have enough people willing to participate for the thing to have a life of its own and have enough circularity, have enough fluidity, liquidity within the network for it to work. So, if I've got a load of FairCoin, I can offer my work and my services for FairCoin, so I'm willing to trade in FairCoin. But I've got to be able to buy stuff with FairCoin. Otherwise, I'm just going to accumulate it, and it's going to be useless to me. So that's the challenge, and I guess that's the primary function of trying to build these local nodes, is so that I can either trade and increase the level of trade that I'm doing using FairCoin, or I can use that local node to cash out and say, okay, well, there's a big pile of FairCoin here. I actually need some sterling or euro or whatever it is that I need. I need to be able to get that out. So, and I know that, for example, part of the ecosystem that they're building is this thing called the Bank of the Commons. I don't know if you've come across that element of it. Yeah, so
I have, but maybe the other people haven't. So
okay, so as I see it, the Bank of the Commons is a sort of an alternative banking system, again outside of the normal regimes and such like. Where I've got a little bit of FairCoin there, and I was one of the sort of founder members of that entity. I put 500 FairCoin into it or something like that early on, and to create that account there, and so I can use that, and theoretically I can use that account to get euros. I can't get sterling out of it yet, but I'm hopeful that might be something that comes in time, and I can potentially use that to convert some of my FairCoins to some other cryptocurrency and vice versa. So there's a sort of an alternative banking mechanism there if I need it. But going back, I guess, to the core feature set that's behind the cryptocurrency is that you don't actually need a bank. If you want to trade in FairCoin, and if I want to do a trade with you in FairCoin, I can just send you FairCoin. I don't need a bank to mediate that transaction. I don't need to pay them a transaction fee to assist that to happen. And there's a huge amount of, if you look at how fiat currency works, and especially exchanges between currencies, it's a source of a huge amount of profit for the private sector and a huge amount of speculation as well, in terms of, if you look at the volume of trades that are happening on currency exchanges as people speculate on currency markets, it's really, it's absolutely massive. So
right, so in effect, we're kind of withdrawing the power that our money has. If you keep your money in a bank, the bank gets more power by using your money to create more debt and to invest. But if you have less money and you have more cryptocurrency, for example, you're kind of withdrawing that little bit of power that you've given for them to generate more of this ridiculous system.
Yeah, that's right. So it's very much a peer-to-peer network, unmediated by supposedly trusted third parties. Now, we all know that certainly in the UK, the banking industry is pretty much corrupt and hasn't really been fulfilling its mission as a trusted third party. It doesn't invest in the economy. What it does is it speculates. It uses our money and it creates more money in order to speculate.
And unsurprisingly, a lot of the development of FairCoin has happened in those countries where that's even more explicit. So Greece and Spain and Poland, where very clearly the banks are not able to cope in a crashing economy.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at what's happened in Greece, particularly in recent years, since the crash and the whole of the attack of the EU central bankers on Greece, Greece's economy has shrunk quite considerably, and has been on the verge of utter collapse really for some time. So makes a lot of sense in that sort of context to try and develop something that's much more isolated outside of those sort of risk factors that actually deals with more sort of human needs, I guess.
Going back to your point, you made 2 points. One was about the suppliers in a system have to have something that they can buy with their FairCoin. If you get paid in FairCoin, you have to have something to buy. And that the benefit of the local nodes is that you can cash out if there is nothing to buy. And the analogy for me is you're setting up dominoes. So you're getting people lined up, even if they're, I'm using the camera. lined up. Even if they're not using FairCoin so much, the fact that they have a little bit means they're ready to use it. And we as a local node are having this conversation with lots and lots of suppliers, just put £50 worth in, just put £100 worth in, do a few trial trades, don't expect to be relying on it. What we're doing is we're setting up the possibilities for connections between people later on. And particularly in this phase where you can't cash out in sterling. This is great if you're in Europe, and in fact it's great if you can cash out in US dollars. But while you can't cash out in sterling, we're kind of stuck. So the nodes that are being developed in the UK, and I only know about London and Yorkshire at the moment, I'm sure there are probably others. This is a big challenge, right?
It is a big challenge, yeah. So at the moment, I think it's a sort of an act of solidarity to get involved, right? So it's like you don't expect it to work particularly, but you like the idea. So you're going to put 10 quid in or 50 quid in, as you say, and say, okay, well we'll play and we'll see what happens, and what can we do here, and how can we help it to become more viable. And so that's the big challenge, is to get enough people in there. So that in order for me to spend my FairCoin, I don't have to travel 1,000 miles and buy a beer in a bar in Barcelona or something.
Yeah, exactly. Can you tell us a little bit about what being a local node means? Firstly, how a local node sets itself up, and then what it's actually going to do.
Well, I'm probably not the best person to answer that question, but I think essentially what the FairCorp has sort of provided a framework, a set of guidelines about how to do some stuff, and if you can do some stuff and tick some boxes, then they'll help you and provide support. So I guess what we're going to try and do in a couple of days, when we're going to have that first sort of meeting, I think, in Leeds, is to have a look at that and try and grow the number of people that are engaged. If we can get it up to sort of 20 or 30 people that have taken that step and said, okay, I'm interested, I'll put 50 quid in or whatever, let's see what we can achieve here by working together. So it's a sort of a facilitator of cooperation in that sense, and that's quite interesting.
Just the act of developing the local node thing is itself developing a solidarity economy.
Absolutely.
It's inherent.
It'll bring people out of the woodwork a bit, I think, who might have heard of it and may choose to come along and say, okay, and you get to meet some people, and you get to have some discussions about how you do this sort of stuff. Because we're all feeling our way on it, really. Everyone's a bit weirded out by this stuff, which is really money, but perhaps it might be. And how can we do this? We don't want to get ripped off, so everyone's really everyone's a bit wary as well. At the same time, everyone's seen what's happened with people losing lots of money on cryptocurrency investments and things like that, so they're very wary about the whole thing. But I think that all power really to Richard and Bob, who've stuck their neck out and said, okay, let's try and do something with this, and we'll see where it goes. I guess if we can build a little bit of traction locally here in Yorkshire, and try and develop a bit of a network of goodwill there that could potentially do some stuff, then I guess you see where it can go from there.
So just so that everybody knows, the meeting that Graham referred to, you can read about it by following FairCoop Yorkshire on Twitter. and the meeting's on Wednesday the 30th at 7:30 at Wharf Chambers in Leeds, which if you live in Leeds, you'll know it. In fact, if you live in West Yorkshire, you probably know it.
Yeah, well, it'll be my first visit there. I don't know, but that's run as a cooperative enterprise, as I understand.
It is, yep. It's a workers' co-op managing a cooperative social club. It's great co-op clustering. If there's anybody out there wanting to contribute to this conversation, I'm afraid I've only got it via Twitter. So send questions or comments via Twitter. Well, I guess they'll only have heard about the live stream address by being on Twitter in the first place.
At least we'll get there, won't it?
Right. What else did I want to ask you about? Yeah. Strategies for getting sterling onto FairCoin. This is a political campaign, I guess. We have to persuade someone somewhere to work out how to get sterling as an exchange currency with FairCoin. Yeah, well,
I think that's doable. I think again, it's at the moment I can use Bank of the Commons to get euros, I suppose, but euros aren't much use to me in Yorkshire. So what we need through that local node is a means of cashing out into sterling. But it needs to be managed, obviously, because otherwise someone's going to be losing a lot of sterling, and what they're getting back is FairCoin. What am I going to do with that? So it's that whole circularity thing. You've got to get enough people involved in the network for it to start having a bit of life of its own and a bit of liquidity.
And my understanding of Bank of the Commons and possibly Freedom Co-op, which I don't think we have time to go into now, is that they have a relationship with a European bank, which is why they can exchange with euros. Is that your understanding also?
I'm not quite sure how it works, to be honest with you. I've not looked at that end of it particularly. I did know that, all I know is that people are getting cash out in euros through. I mean, I know you've been to Barcelona at the offices there of the Catalan Integral Cooperativa. They've got an ATM there, haven't they? I think where you can.
I don't know. Yeah, they have. I didn't see anyone using it while I was there, which is interesting.
Yeah.
But then they mostly don't get paid in FairCoin. They mostly get paid in their local alternative currency of Echoes.
Yeah. So they've got another currency, haven't they?
They've got it, yeah. And I think they distinguish quite clearly between the local currency, which is there to enable, facilitate, create a local economy, and FairCoin, which is more useful internationally. More useful for making contacts with people who are beyond the possibility of your kind of social network, at least geographically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd love to be able to buy a book using FairCoin or stuff like that, things like that. At the moment, it's really very.
That's probably one of the few things you can do. There's probably bookshops in Spain that are using FairCoin.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, that'd be great. So tell me, so where we've got to in Yorkshire is effectively a small group of people talking on Telegram, I think mainly, which is a communications app on phones.
Yeah, there's a Telegram group.
And a couple of meetings, and that's where we're up to?
It's very early days, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think there's as you say, there's a group in London that are trying to do something similar. I don't know where they're at with that. I've not been able to talk to anyone there as yet, but be interested to find out what they're doing and see if we can work together with them. Because having somebody who's in the same sort of fiat currency region as you are, then that's only going to be to the good.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in the States at the moment, and one of the things I was hoping to find was cooperatives, whether housing cooperatives or worker cooperatives or in fact any kind of cooperative that was engaged in some way in cryptocurrencies, to see how they were managing that. I haven't actually come across any. So I guess if anybody out there knows of any, please tweet them now. But that to me seems like a stronger way of embedding, of making the links in a local and in fact global solidarity economy, where you've got businesses which see that as part of their kind of social mission in a way.
Yeah. I mean, I think I had a really good discussion a while back at the sort of COTEC gathering last November. As met with a guy called Bill there who works in a co-op up in the northwest somewhere, and he and I were talking about FairCoin and cryptocurrency generally, and he was talking then about the idea of a sort of a cooperative token that that wasn't traded really, but it was there purely as a sort of a solidarity token. So if you wanted to trade with another co-op, and they supported the token as well, then you could use the token as part of the transaction. And if his suggestion was that, well, if everybody, if when you trade with a cooperative, you get some cooperative tokens back as part of that transaction, so everyone's getting these tokens, and the only way you can get rid of them is by trading with a cooperative.
Yeah.
Okay, so you create a sort of a parallel economy that runs alongside the fiat economy. So, if I go to my local co-op store and I buy something, I give them a £10 note, for example, and they give me change. I spend £8, they give me £1 in sterling and £1 in cooperative tokens. And the only way I can get rid of that cooperative token is by trading it with a cooperative. And so you could see how you could use FairCoin in the same way, really.
Yeah.
So it needn't be an all or nothing type thing. You could say, okay, well, we'll trade 50-50 in fiat and in cryptocurrency.
And in fact, you kind of have to do that during the early stages because there just aren't enough
suppliers. Yeah, because you've got to pay the rent, sort of thing.
Exactly. One of my interests was I live in a housing co-op. It's a network of housing co-ops, in fact. So actually, we seem to be in Radical Roots in a unique position to start accepting FairCoin, which is kind of one of the fundamental problems is needing to pay the rent, and that's alternative currencies are no good for that, generally speaking. But then I thought, well, networks of housing co-ops, perhaps that we can really give a push to this to the growth of the economy, of the alternative economy. I wondered whether anybody who's in the room had any questions, stuff that you want clarified, haven't understood, or questions about where you think it might be going. I'll take that as a...
That's great. My question is, where's the microphone for the question and answer people down there? That's what I had to set up, but ignore that I said that.
If any of them want to talk, I think we'll find a microphone. Okay, and I haven't seen anybody on Twitter asking any questions. Graham, have you got any other points that you'd like to make or questions that you have? And while we're at it, do you know how much time we have left on Zoom?
Well, I think we're okay on time. I don't think that's a problem. I guess all I'd say about FairCoin is that it's worth sort of engaging with it, really, as we say, and purely from a solidarity basis. If everyone who's interested in cooperatives were to go out and invest their sort of $30, $50, or whatever it might be in FairCoin, then that would be okay. So. And and once they've got their FairCoin, then they can start working out what the hell they're going to do with it, and maybe start intertrading and stuff like that. So that's where the value starts to become. It starts to make some sense, rather than just sort of treat it as some weird thing. Okay, well that's interesting. It's weird. We'll keep it in the corner. Actually engage with it. If you've got a little bit of time and a little bit of cash that you could risk just investing in it and see what happens, and you get some coins and play. and find out what's going on. So I'd encourage people to do that.
I guess the other thing for me is to think of a bit like cooperatives. I see cryptocurrencies and alternative currencies and cooperatives not as things, not as ends in themselves, but as tools that are getting me towards something else, something beyond.
Yeah.
When it comes to currencies, for me, the end goal is we've created our community. It's fabulous. We don't need the money anymore. The gift economy is like the ultimate goal. 5 generations away, we might reach it, but this is a tool to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're not in cooperatives because we love sitting in meetings or anything like that. We get
Some
involved
of us
because
are.
we want to change. we get involved because we want to change things. Because what's there isn't satisfactory. It's not good enough, and lots of people are being failed by that system. So what we want to try and do is create something that's much better, and cooperatives clearly are a really important part of that jigsaw of what that new economy looks like. And using things like cryptocurrency, we can play in that space and we can make up the rules as we go along to a degree. So it's really interesting. It's worth engaging in the debate on that and see where that might take us.
I really also love the idea that we have got a currency that we have the ability to input. It's a democratically controlled currency. I think that's fantastic. I'm going to tangent off a little bit now. I'm in New York, and in New York City there is the what does CNIC stand for? Cooperative Economy Association of NYC, and there's Solidarity NYC, and you have recently been part of setting up Solidarity Kirklees. What did you call it? Tell me again.
Well, we called it the Kirklees Solidarity Economy Network for the moment. Okay, so this is inspired in part by what's been happening that I've read about in Cleveland, the evergreen cooperatives in Cleveland, and also by more locally to us the work in Lancashire, Preston in Lancashire, where as a result of the efforts of really one person, I think, that started it, a Labour councillor in Preston, they've managed to sort of relocalise something like £200 million worth of spending from what they call the anchor institutions in Preston, which is a fabulous achievement, really. And I think that what they're doing there now, I was listening to an interview by somebody who's involved in that, a guy called Julian Manley, who's with the University of Central Lancashire, and he's involved in the project. And what they're doing there is that they've moved that relocalized spending from those anchoring institutions. They've taken it from something like 20% to well over 50% of the budget of those big organizations is now being spent locally. And the institutions are now coming back to them and saying, well, we'd like to increase that further, but we can't actually source the services and products that we need locally because the businesses aren't there. So they're now at the point where they're saying, okay, so what we'll do then is we'll see if there's scope to actually create a new business to meet that demand. And of course, we can structure that as a cooperative business. So, and that's the model. So again, the same model as that has been used in Cleveland, as I understand it, to build that economy.
It has. I'm trying to remember. We had a conversation, didn't we? Laurie and Terry are filmmakers. I'm just trying to remember if you'd actually been to Preston. Remind me. Aha. Okay, researched it. Yeah. Did you have any questions about I don't know, what was the aspect of that you might have to come to the mic if you do want to say anything. Yeah, what were the particular aspects of that you were interested in telling a story about? And yeah, what was your thinking?
Well, we're interested in how communities...
Is it working, Steve, the mic?
Can you hear me, Graham? Graham can't hear me. Okay, can you hear me, Graham? No.
Yeah, speak up.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. We're researching how communities can take on their own economic development. And we were researching Preston, very interested in this whole concept of the anchor institutions, because we were looking at it more at a grassroots level of the people actually doing it through businesses and creating businesses that benefit the entire community rather than just the workers in the business. Kind of a contributionism model based on the work of Michael Tellinger from South Africa.
Tell us more about that.
Okay. Well, Michael Tellinger has this idea, and I'm going to give you an example to kind of couch it. We really like this example. There's a town in Germany called Wildpolsried, where the community got together and they put solar panels on everything in their community, every building, every house, and coupled that with some of their other energy generating capacities, and ended up making 3 times as much energy as they needed for their town. The 2/3 that they didn't need was sold outside the town, and the money from that was used to improve the various amenities in the town to the benefit of all the people there. So that's an example of what Michael Tellinger is proposing in what he calls the One Small Town Can Save the World project. And so he put out a call for a town to step forward to try out this idea of creating businesses, not just electricity businesses, but other businesses that produce 3 times as much product as they need for their town, their neighborhood, or whatever.
Like food, like...
shoes,
okay.
Lettuce, anything, honey. And so he put out this call, and we've been following this for a number of years, wanting to make a documentary along these lines. And someone responded to the call and said, "Our town will do it." And I looked I thought, oh, this town's probably in South Africa or the UK or someplace. Turns out it's in Canada, 7 hours away from New York, where we now live. So we went there in October to film the very beginnings of this. It's actually a township. It's a very rural kind of area. And they're taking on this whole idea. And so they are now designing businesses. So I was fascinated when you were talking about Preston now coming to this idea of, gee, we need more businesses, because they're doing things like producing honey 3 times as much as they need, and they were able to raise all the money they needed to fund this honey making project in just a few minutes, because they had prepared a lot of people to become investors.
From the town itself?
From the town and from around the town and from all over, people who just knew about it, who are like, I want to invest, I can't wait to invest.
Actually, I don't think we had a conversation about this, but my assumption is you pretty much need the whole town to buy into this, because they need to say, yes, we're going to stop buying honey and just have the stuff that's provided for us.
Not necessarily,
okay.
And that's one of the things that's fascinating about it. You need volunteers who are willing to put in 3 hours a week to tend the hives. And honey, by the way, is just one example, because there's now like 10 other businesses that they're considering. But it's just an example. And so the volunteers who step forward tend the hives, and they get free honey because they're tending the hives, but the idea is they're making enough honey that would be consumed by the people who live locally. They don't have to buy it, but they're making enough. And at some point, the idea is that honey would be available to everybody in the town eventually for free. And then they're also starting an aquaponics facility. They're going to create greens and seafood, fish and shrimp. And they just design it to make 3 times as much as their community would consume, and sell the other 2/3 out. So the 2/3 that they sell, that money is split 3 ways. We've actually designed a board game to help explain how this all works because it was very complex for us to just like trying to understand cryptocurrency. It's kind of, you have to wrap your brain around it. So the money that these community businesses run by mostly volunteer labor from the community, contributed labor, that money is divided 3 ways. 1/3 is to pay back the investors. 1/3 is to compensate the people who've been volunteering. And 1/3 is pumped into improving the project itself or developing new businesses. So the idea is that over time, even if you have this on a very small scale, you can start to pay back your investors, you can start to compensate your workers, and you can start to build new businesses. So the idea is, Michael Tullinger's idea is that you use capitalism and twist it to get rid of itself. So that's kind of, like just really grabbing onto it and taking advantage of that.
And I think this is a concept that lots of people go, oh, I don't think you can do that.
Oh, yeah.
Or using, I think, what was Bell Hooks said, using the master's tools to destroy, you can't use the master's tools to destroy the master's house. And I found it really interesting that the kind of, this is exactly how you do it. And I'm really intrigued. I'm really intrigued. I love the diagram, which we haven't got to show you guys, sorry. But the one thing this makes me think of a lot is design. This design kind of covers all of the stuff we're talking about, and it always for me comes back to permaculture, social permaculture design. And Graham, I know that that's one of your things also. You were in Spain. Do I remember right? You were doing permaculture in Spain? I don't remember exactly what you were doing there.
Well, we were trying to develop a project there about using sort of permacultural techniques to.
What have I done? Sorry. There we go. Carry on. Say again.
Still there.
Yeah. Say again.
Yeah, we were trying to do something to develop the use of sort of permacultural techniques for olive farming in Spain. For a couple of years, it had some modest success, I think, while we were there.
And do you see this as a linked, or in any way is it like, well, that was olives and this is currency in West Yorkshire?
Well, I think that the basic values are clearly linked. I think there's, there seems to be some element of convergence going on now, so that people that are involved in cooperatives and people that are involved in permaculture and people that are involved in cryptocurrency and free software are starting to come together and have those conversations. And the interesting stuff is happening in the bits where they join up, really.
Yeah, absolutely. The edge, I think, is what you would call it in permaculture.
Well, yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Integrate, don't separate. We can keep coming up with principles. I'm aware that we have another great speaker in the audience. So Steve Wineman is working, or has written a book around, actually, Steve, it's probably best for you to describe it better than me. The connections I'm going to make are around the problems that organizations, particularly collectives, face, especially non-hierarchical collectives face, when the group dynamics in the collective really screw up, which is often down to people's own stuff that they've got going on. I wondered, Steve, if you have, sorry, I'm really putting you on the spot, and I don't know if you've really thought about it that much. If you have kind of done any thinking about how people relate to groups particularly, and kind of accountability to the group and to their own stuff that they've got going on. Is that too vague of a question?
Would you please go to the microphone so then you're a little bit on the...
If he has something to say in response to this vagueness.
I've just been listening up to now. All right. Here I'm at the microphone.
You
can pull it off the stand if you want.
Just bend.
It is a little bit too vague. Well, let me not be judgmental about it. It would be helpful.
Be judgmental, it's fine.
It would be helpful for me if you could be a little bit more specific in the question.
Okay, so yeah, let me put this in context. One of the things I'm interested in is why cooperatives and projects fail.
Right.
And very often it's down to people not working together well, people not getting on with each other well, and very often that is down to the way people react to each other or their inability to communicate. And I know that in my housing co-op, we think it's pretty much essential to have a feelings meeting every month where we find out what's going on with each other and whether we're having negative experiences at living at, in our situation. We also put some effort into understanding people's different backgrounds and privileges and stuff that's gone on in the past. And this makes a really big difference to how much we care for each other and how much we're willing to work together and really work efficiently together because we already understand where each other's coming from. And it helps us make decisions, more strategic decisions particularly, more successfully because we're heading in the same direction.
Right.
I think what we don't have down very well is something which they're better at Ghana's community where we're all staying or living, where they spend a lot of time on really deep understanding of each other's stuff, and they're not afraid to kind of say, to criticize each other in a relatively direct way. And people who've been doing it for a long time are reasonably good at hearing that criticism and taking it on board. And I guess I'm not asking a question, more kind of what does this make you think about?
Too many things.
Yeah, sorry.
So let me just try to lay out the different directions that I go with.
You need to need a little bit closer.
Let me just try to lay out some of the things that this makes me think about. So probably the thing that's most specifically on point to the issue that you're raising and the stuff that I've written has to do with trauma, but you can't, well, you can, but I don't think I think it's more useful to think about trauma in the context of oppression and oppression dynamics. And those exist in every group, everywhere, So again, to just try to reduce this to an overly simple point, my assumption is that anywhere and everywhere you go, trauma is in the room. It's in the room in terms of people's histories. It's in the room in terms of what people carry forth from their histories. It's in the room in people's reactivity and how reactivity gets managed or doesn't get managed. And I've, at many different levels, I've just seen a lot of groups break down around the playing out of reactivity that's driven by trauma.
And can you just give an example of the kind of a trauma that you can say in this instance this kind of thing happened, so that we know what we mean by trauma, because it could mean a bunch of things.
Yeah. Both from my kind of analytical understanding or conceptual understanding and my own experience as someone who I have severe childhood trauma in my history, so I know this from very deep personal experience as well. The core of trauma is the subjective experience of powerlessness. And I think people often think about trauma in terms of the magnitude of abuse, which is clearly relevant, but the same degree of abuse can affect two different people very differently. So, a famous example of someone who was apparently not nearly as traumatized as almost everyone in concentration camps is Viktor Frankl, who, and I have to say I have not read Viktor Frankl. So let me give an example of something that I actually have read. In Long Road to Freedom, Nelson Mandela, a lot of the book is about his 20 years in Robben Island, and he He describes an experience where he was on a work crew in the quarry, and the commander of the camp approached the quarry with his superior from Johannesburg or wherever. And Mandela had been advocating for certain changes, improvements in camp policies, in prison policies, that had been getting nowhere. And he saw this as a huge opportunity to try to get that message across at a higher level. So he approached the commander and the commander's supervisor, and the commander said, "Go back to work." And Mandela ignored him and tried to speak to the superior, and was put in solitary for 4 days. And his response to being put in solitary was this is what he writes. He says, it was a reminder of something that I knew but had, because of my desperation, had forgotten, which is that you should never try to embarrass someone in a position of authority in front of their superior. It's just not going to work. So the point is that in this, like the vilest place in the world, having just been thrown in solitary, he responded from a place of agency, not from a place of powerlessness. So even though all these horrible things were happening, he was not traumatized at the level that many of us would be, because he had the internal resources and the solidarity support to retain his agency. When people are in abusive situations and treated abusively, and oppression, in my view, oppressions are organized systems of abuse, and don't have those resources to retain their agency, we are then in a state of subjective powerlessness, and that is the core of traumatic experience. And when that doesn't get resolved, it festers. And so someone who is coming from that base experience that is unresolved in a group has someone say, you're really fucked up about this. It so easily triggers historical trauma. So I now am once again the victim, and I'm being mistreated, and there's nothing I can do about it. So I'm now in the present. All that history of subjective powerlessness is welling up for me in the present. It's happening again, and there's not a thing I can do. Well, in fact, in the present, I have lots of things that I can do, including lash out against this person who I'm reacting to in a way that historically, if I was 5 years old and being raped, I really had no resources and no options. But now I'm an adult, and I can be very nasty verbally back in a reactive state, but I'm not experiencing that as agency. I'm just experiencing that as kind of very primitive self-defense. So I'm in this I'm experiencing myself as powerless, but if it brings me into a state of rage which I'm acting out, I'm actually having a really powerful effect on people around me, which is really destructive. So that's the dynamic that I've experienced on both ends, and that I've seen have really tear groups apart. Sorry if it's a longer answer.
No, that's good. I mean, where I wanted to go with that was in cooperatives, in this kind of new world where, particularly with the use of digital tools, we can be really non-hierarchical. We enable participation massively. And I think it's very common that people in these people who are leaders in these groups have more sense of agency or have more resources and are less aware of other people's lack of capacity or lack of agency. So we get very carried away with how enthusiastic we are, and these things are all going to solve the world, and hey, I've created this great platform, this great app, everyone can participate. And then we tend to assume that other people, I'm putting me in that category therefore, tend to assume that other people have the same sense of agency or have the same capacity to engage, and really underestimate who's not in the room, B, when people come forth and we're like, hey, this person who's slightly different to me, is in a different demographic, is joining our group, this is great. and pretty immediately put them off with a way of talking or a way of making assumptions, which they have this kind of understandable reaction to and we're completely unaware of.
Right.
And I think that's really important. So there's two things that I take from what you're saying, which is one, being aware of how trauma affects other people's reactions to what you're saying yourself and capacity to engage, and B, understanding your own sense of trauma so that when you are acting out, you recognize that.
Right.
Because so many times, I think we've all witnessed this, somebody in a room who's taking a reasonably kind of driving forward kind of role, somebody else comes in and they're like expressing dissatisfaction or they're not really getting it, or, you know, they're kind of like, I've definitely experienced the kind of, wait, you're getting in the way of this. You're slowing us down. What? If you weren't in the room, this project would move forward way more quickly. Now, sometimes that's probably valid. They're just the wrong person and shouldn't actually be part of the group. But a lot of times, that's just me kind of probably experiencing, in previous times, I didn't have the agency to stop this, but now I'm in the driving seat.
Yep.
And I want to carry on being in the driving seat, and I'm not recognizing that in myself.
Right.
And in cooperatives and collectives and, you know, things that value non-hierarchy, it's super important to recognize this. Otherwise, we're just kidding ourselves.
Right.
We're just kidding ourselves that this is any kind of non-hierarchical or collective effort. It's not. It's the people who have the most capacity either to act, or the people who have the least capacity to understand other people's.
Right.
Yeah. I feel just like a long rant, not a question to anybody.
No, that all makes a lot of sense. And another piece of this that I'm learning about from Michael at Ganas, and I think it's really critically important, is what's the culture of an organization, so that if you have a culture that kind of creates norms and has a way of nourishing and supporting people to not only be aware of their own reactivity, but accept. I don't want to. The criticism is not really the right. In some ways, it's more. It accepts support from other people to recognize, to help. You know, it's like I don't really have a lot of good experience with this, but I have an image or a vision of being part of a group where I would want people to stop me if I'm being reactive, you know, and to do for me what in that moment I'm not able to do for myself in terms of recognizing my reactivity. But when you don't have a culture that supports that, which kind of nourishes each of us as individuals to be, you know, welcoming of that kind of, and see that as support, then it's so easy to just see that as take that as criticism and attack.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, Steve, shut up because you're really not being helpful right now. You know, so
maybe it depends on the way they say it.
Well, some, but yes, and it also depends on my receptivity to it. And you know, I gathered that a lot of the development of the culture at Ganas has had to do with creating that kind of culture.
Right. Yeah. Graham, I don't know if you have anything you want to input on this.
Well, it's an interesting conversation. I think that, you know, for me, taking it back to the whole sort of cooperative model, is that certainly in my experience, the fact that we can use a cooperative model gives us the opportunity to engage in this sort of conversation, really, within the environment of that sort of co-organizing and sharing space. You know, if you're, you know, I mean, I'm sure that there are conventional organizations, businesses that aren't cooperatives, where people are valued and supported and nourished in the way that your speaker there is talking about. I'm sure those things do exist, but my experience is that they're very much in the minority, whereas within the cooperative context, they're very much in the majority. So I think that what we're looking at is creating economic models where people that have these traumatic experiences in their past can actually be much more effectively supported, and thereby make a more effective contribution to the community that they're living and working in.
I have to say that I think it's absolutely incumbent upon cooperatives that value democracy and non-hierarchy to find formal, regular mechanisms for creating this culture of giving and receiving feedback in the supportive way that Steve was talking about. Yeah. I mean, I think that's just it in a nutshell.
It's not easy, and
it's definitely not easy.
It takes a lot of work to be able to do that, and do that well, and do it day in, day out, as it were.
Yeah.
But I guess the sort of point I'm trying to get to there is that if the existence of the sort of basic cooperative non-hierarchical model gives you a platform on which you can then build that stuff.
Yes. Yeah, because you can collectively decide that one of the things that your co-op does is this thing, and therefore that's what you do. Like I think I'm just rambling, but every morning or every week, collectively you make time to do the thing, which is self-learning or reading up on various oppressions that people face, or discussing with each other about how do you react to this kind of a statement. They have a list of consciousness-raising questions, which are for groups to take a question and individually answer that question. And the questions, actually the most interesting question that I came across was, how do you feel when you tell people what you do for money?
Okay.
And that has a number of levels to it. What you get is people's socioeconomic background, what they're expected to be doing for money in their, given their history, whether they're proud and enjoying what they do, whether they're embarrassed for their background, or whether they're embarrassed in the current, or whether they actually hate their job, whether they feel forced into a terrible job because they don't have any other choices. It gives you a whole rich stuff about, in our house, it's like, well, when I ask my new housemate what she does for money, and she says, oh, I work this terrible job that I hate and I feel like I'm selling my soul, then I know that we need to give her some space in terms of rent to try and find a much better job, and also not ask her every day, how was your day today? Either she wants to vent about how terrible it was, or she would rather just quickly skip over that and move to something else. And it's incumbent upon us to find opportunities. So when job opportunities come up, rather than going, oh, this person always does these great jobs, I know they do a great job doing this, is actually to go to, this other person would do a great job as well, and it's more important for her to hear about this opportunity. I don't know, that's a kind of random example, but it gives you a history into people's childhoods and all that kind of stuff. Right, I'm kind of rambling, and I realize that I haven't thought of a way of ending this interview at all.